Good morning, and welcome to Astronomy Daily. I'm Anna.
And I'm Avery. It's Wednesday, July 1st, 2026, the start of a new month, and what a way to kick it off.
Today, we're opening with something genuinely historic. The Vera Rubin Observatory has officially started filming its 10-year movie of the universe.
Plus, a quick update on the Swift rescue mission after yesterday's scrub. NASA's plan to send a spare Mars rover to the moon's south pole. Blue Origin shows off its rebuilt launch pad. Rocket Lab makes an $8 billion move on Iridium, and we close with scientists mapping out humanity's next giant leap to Saturn's moon, Titan.
6 stories, one very big Wednesday. Let's get into it. We start today with a moment astronomers have been waiting decades for. As of yesterday, June 30th, the NSF DOE Vera Rubin Observatory has officially begun the Legacy Survey of Space and Time, the LSST.
We've talked about Rubin a few times this year. First with the first look images back in mid-2025, then in April when its early test data turned up over 11,000 new asteroids in just 6 weeks. But this is different. This is the real thing starting. 10 straight years of full science operations.
From a mountaintop in Chile, Cerro Pachón, Rubin's Simone survey telescope will now scan the entire southern sky every few nights using the largest digital camera ever built, 3,200 megapixels. It produces a new image roughly every 40 seconds.
Over the decade, Rubin will revisit every patch of sky about 800 times, stacking exposures to reveal fainter and fainter detail. Each night, it gathers around 10 terabytes of data and can generate up to 7 million alerts about things that have changed in the sky, brightened, dimmed, or moved.
NSF's Brian Stone put it beautifully. Today, we begin filming the greatest cosmic movie ever made. And Rubin's Deputy Director of Operations, Phil Marshall, said it takes 20 years of hard science and engineering to get to the point where they can finally call action.
What's actually at stake here is huge. Dark energy, dark matter, the structure of the universe itself, but also very practical things. Hundreds of thousands of new asteroids and comets, planetary defense data, and an open data set that any scientist or member of the public will eventually be able to explore.
Bob Blum, Rubin's director at NORLab, called it amazing and humbling to be there after so many years of work. And for anyone who remembers us covering that asteroid haul back in April, Mariut Jurek's line was that it was just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, the iceberg just got a lot bigger. 10 years of nightly filming starts now.
An extraordinary way to start July. Onwards.
Next, a quick update for anyone following the Swift rescue mission, since we covered the full background in depth yesterday.
Right. The Link spacecraft's ride to orbit on the very last Pegasus XL rocket was scrubbed on Tuesday due to unfavorable weather over Kwajalein Atoll.
NASA and Catalyst Space have retargeted for tonight our time, 9:43 p.m. local Kwajalein time, which is 5:43 Eastern. Stargazer and Pegasus are still go. They're just waiting on the weather to clear.
So, fingers crossed for a clean run this time. We'll bring you the result as soon as it happens.
Moving on, from a scrubbed launch to a very different moon story.
NASA gave its second monthly moon-based briefing yesterday, and it came with a genuine surprise.
The headline business first. NASA has awarded roughly $590 million across Astrobotic, Firefly Aerospace, and Intuitive Machines for 4 new robotic lander missions targeted for late 2028. Astrobotic picked up 2 of them, flying on its Griffin 1 lander, one of which will carry Astrolab's Flip rover to the surface.
Administrator Jared Isaacman described the approach as drawing on the 1960s playbook. You don't jump straight to Apollo 11, you build up capabilities step by step.
But the real headline grabber was what Isaacman floated almost as an aside. NASA's considering repurposing an engineering test version of its nuclear-powered Mars rovers built alongside Perseverance and Curiosity and sending it to the moon's south pole instead.
They're calling it PROMISE, Polar Rover for Observation, Mapping, and In Situ Exploration. It's currently just sitting at JPL as a test unit, but Isaacman said there's, quote, very little that would hold us back from making use of that hardware.
What makes it interesting is the power source. NASA already has Viper heading to the moon next year. But Viper runs on solar power, which limits where it can go. Promise would use a radioisotope generator, the same kind of nuclear battery that's kept Curiosity going for 14 years on Mars.
That means Promise could drive right into permanently shadowed craters at the lunar South Pole, the ones that never see sunlight and are thought to hold significant water ice, and just keep working through the lunar night.
And in the least serious moment of the briefing, Isaacman asked the moon-based program manager to promise, no pun intended, that a soccer ball would fly to the moon on one of these landers if the U.S. wins the World Cup. Said it would one-up Alan Shepard's lunar golf shot.
A nice reminder that even in a briefing full of contracts and rover engineering, there's still room for a bit of fun. Promise is still very much in the considering phase, but if it flies, it'll be a rover with quite the resume already.
From the moon to the launch pad, literally. 1 month on from the dramatic New Glenn explosion at Cape Canaveral, Blue Origin gave its first real look at what comes next.
As a reminder, on May 28th, a New Glenn first stage exploded during a static fire test at Launch Complex 36A, destroying the rocket and badly damaging the pad. The Lightning Tower and Transporter Erector were lost, though the tank farm integration facility and water tower survived.
CEO Dave Limp announced yesterday that Blue Origin is not simply rebuilding what was there before. They're pivoting to what they're calling a horizontal-vertical hybrid configuration. Stages are mated horizontally in the integration facility, then rolled out and raised vertically by crane at the pad, with the payload attached once it's upright.
Interestingly, that's not a new idea for them. It's the concept they'd already been developing for a second pad to support their much larger future rocket, the 9x4 variant. They've essentially brought that design forward to rebuild 36A sooner.
On the cause of the explosion, Limp said early analysis points to the aft section of the first stage, but the investigation is still active. The good news, by his own account, quote, "We caught a lot of breaks. Hardware recovery and debris removal are already complete, and reconstruction has begun."
There's real pressure behind this. New Glenn is central to NASA's Artemis plans. It's due to carry the Blue Moon lander, and Blue Origin says it still intends to fly again before the end of this year.
NASA's Jared Isaacman, who visited the damaged pad in person, said the agency has been looking at contingency options, but that Plan A is looking a lot better today than it was a few weeks ago.
A tough month for Blue Origin, but a genuinely fast recovery so far. We'll keep tracking it toward that end-of-year target. Now for the biggest deal in the commercial space sector this year. Rocket Lab has agreed to acquire satellite communications giant Iridium in a cash and stock deal worth about $8 billion.
Under the terms, Iridium shareholders get $54 a share. 27 in cash, 27 in Rocket Lab stock, which works out to roughly a 24% premium. The market loved it. Rocket Lab shares jumped around 16%, and Iridium's soared about 25%.
So for anyone who doesn't know Iridium, it's one of the original global satellite communications networks dating back to Motorola in the late 1980s, and famous for surviving a dramatic bankruptcy in 1999 before reinventing itself. Today, it runs 66 satellites in low Earth orbit and serves more than 2.5 million subscribers. Government, defense, aviation, maritime, journalists in war zones, all sorts of users who need connectivity when nothing else works.
So why does Rocket Lab want it? Because right now, Rocket Lab builds rockets and satellites, but doesn't operate its own big constellation. This deal instantly hands him a mature, profitable, already licensed global network, along with valuable radio spectrum, rather than spending years and billions building one from scratch.
Rocket Lab founder Peter Beck has been open about wanting to become a fully vertically integrated space company, designing, building, launching, and operating, much like SpaceX has done with Starlink. This is a very direct step in that direction.
Analyst reaction has been strongly positive too. One space consultant put it simply: the existing customer base and distribution network Rocket Lab gains might end up being worth more than the satellites and spectrum themselves.
Rocket Lab's lined up a $3.6 billion bridge loan from Deutsche Bank and Wells Fargo to help fund the cash portion. and the deal's expected to close around the middle of next year, pending the usual regulatory approvals.
It's a genuine changing of the guard moment for the smaller end of the space industry, and a clear shot across the bow for anyone assuming SpaceX would have this space to itself.
Big money, big ambitions. We'll be watching how this one plays out. We'll close today with something further out, literally. Earlier this month, a group of scientists and engineers gathered in Boulder, Colorado, for the very first Humans to Titan Summit.
Titan is Saturn's largest moon, a strange, hazy world with rivers, lakes, and rain, except instead of water, it's all liquid methane and ethane. And for the first time, a dedicated group of experts sat down and seriously asked, could humans actually go there?
The summit was organized by Amanda Hendricks, director of the Planetary Science Institute and president of the advocacy group Explore Titan. She told Space.com the goal wasn't to plan a mission next year, it was to normalize the idea that Titan is a genuinely reasonable destination for humans, so it can sit in our minds as the next stop after Mars.
And Titan does have some surprising advantages. Its atmosphere is actually thicker than Earth's, so you wouldn't need a pressurized suit like you would on the Moon or Mars. You'd mainly need to stay warm. Some researchers have even floated the idea of strapping on wings or a jetpack to fly through that thick air under something close to human muscle power.
The challenges are just as extraordinary, though. Building habitats, transportation, and airlocks for a world that's minus 179 degrees Celsius on average, with methane monsoons and floods to plan around.
Scott Rafkin from the Southwest Research Institute, who hosted the two-day gathering, said it plainly. Sending humans to Titan is extraordinarily ambitious, but he called the summit the beginning of a long-term effort to imagine and ultimately achieve something transformative.
We do have a real precursor already in motion. NASA's Dragonfly rotorcraft, nuclear-powered, about the size of a small car, is targeted to launch no earlier than 2028 on a 6-year journey for a multi-year surface mission exploring Titan by air.
Whatever Dragonfly finds in the next decade will shape everything that comes after it. But it's a nice thought to end on. Even while we're mapping asteroids by the 10,000s and reboosting telescopes, somewhere in a conference room in Boulder, people are already sketching what it might take to walk on a beach of liquid methane under Saturn's rings.
And that's Astronomy Daily for today.
What a first day of July. A 10-year cosmic movie beginning, a Mars rover eyeing a lunar detour, 2 very different launch industry shakeups, and humans quietly starting to plan for Titan.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit subscribe wherever you're listening and leave us a review if you can. It really does help new listeners find the show.
We'll have the Swift Link launch result for you as soon as it happens. Fingers crossed for clear skies over Kwajalein tonight.
Until tomorrow, keep looking up.
Clear skies, everyone.